This is before, after, before, after, before, after. Jeffrey Adonis. Jeffrey Adonis. Hello guys, my name is Hieu and welcome to my first ever course. Today we'll be covering all the basics and everything you need to know about After Effects in terms of working with motion design and motion graphics, and we'll be using that and applying all those knowledge into making this animation of a poopy doopy. And finally we'll be looking at how to create this gradient finish for our design for a better, maybe more polished and more professional look. Yeah, this course is absolutely free. Feel free to leave your comments down below, or your reviews, whether you like it or not, and I hope you like it. And then there's also a link down in the description below for a file that's gonna contain the certificate of completion of the course, some custom-made badges, and the After Effects project file for this particular video right here. And yeah, the whole file is password protected, and at the end of the video, at the end of the course, sorry, I'm gonna mention what the password is, and you can put that into the zip folder, and then it's gonna unpack for you. And so make sure you watch till the end of the video, or you can skip ahead. You know, I don't care. I would do the same probably. And if you're a beginner, I completely understand all of the hesitancies and all of the anxieties that you may have when you first start out. So if you feel like you don't completely understand or don't completely comprehend all the info that I got in this video, feel free to pause the video, for example, or take 1 or 2 days or maybe a couple of days to fully absorb in all the details. Don't be too hard on yourself. You're gonna do this. Let's go. So you know the drill. Let's jump into this project. Okay, so let's begin. Welcome everyone to chapter 1 of this course. Now in chapter 1 we're gonna go through all of the ingredients and all of the materials in After Effects that I think is really helpful in doing specifically motion graphics and motion design. Maybe you can treat this as a beginner course. And let's start with the welcome screen. So in the newer versions of After Effects, you're gonna be welcomed by this screen as soon as you open up After Effects. So over here you get new project, open project, and not a lot of people like this screen, so you can actually turn it off within the program itself. So I'm gonna head over here and click on new project. And right here, now this is the entire interface of After Effects over here. This is all you're gonna be compiling and doing your work on. Over here you got the project panel. Imagine that you're cooking, for example, and you get all of your ingredients and all of your bowl and all your mixes in each of the components within their space. This is exactly the same, only it is the folder system mainly tied to your specific project. It doesn't exist anywhere else, only in your project. Over here you got your preview panel. So if you put anything inside of the composition, or if you draw anything new in your composition, it's gonna appear over here. And right here, this is all of your tool panels. You got all the infos, audio, preview settings, and most importantly the effects and presets, which I will be touching on later in the process of doing the poopsy poops. And yeah, down here you get a paragraph which ties mostly into text editor, and align, which does what it says in the title. It aligns layer relative to the composition. One thing that After Effects is also similar to Photoshop or Illustrator, for example, up here you got all the toolbars for all of the action you're gonna do and everything you're gonna need to animate and to design. So I think it's gonna be easier for me to further explain all the function in After Effects if I import something or create a new material in here. So let me just go ahead and do that. What you're gonna want to do when you start out a new project is head over here to New Composition, click on that, and right here, based on this interface over here, you got all the presets with height of the composition. So imagine composition as your canvas, for example. If you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator, imagine this as making a new artboard. So over here you got all the basic settings that Adobe has provided to you. Make sure in your production line, you ask your coworker or you ask your supervisor which settings you're gonna be making the video out of. And make sure you get that right, because if you're working on a YouTube video, for example, you're gonna want it to be something horizontal and fit with the size of the screen. So you get the basic 920 by 1080. And over here you get a box right here that you can lock your aspect ratio to. So for example, if I drag up this size up, the height of the composition is not going to change. But I click on the locked aspect ratio button. When I drag up the width, the height is also going to be up accordingly to this ratio. Frame rate is the second most important thing over here. It's actually pretty crucial to how the audience is gonna perceive your animation. So you get a variety of frame rates that you can select from. You can go from 8, which looks like something out of a traditional animation, all the way up to 120. The start time code, you can actually set your starting point to something other than 0, but usually I would keep it at 0. And finally, the third most important part of the composition is the length. For example, the video that we're going to create is just going to be somewhere around maybe 10-15 seconds. So I've already got 15 down here. I'm going to delete this 0. Ooh, yeah, I think I need to break down all the numbers over here first. So this number over here, that's gonna be the second, the number of the second of your video. This one to the left of it is minutes, so if you put 1 in it, that's gonna be 1 minute and 15 seconds. And finally, the one at the beginning of the row is hours. So for example, you put in 2, you got 2 hours and 15 seconds, and that's gonna be a long video. Now, you might be wondering, what is it over here? What is the number that's even further away from seconds? And that are the amount of frames. And that's something that I can explain later on when we finally got a timeline set up. You can set your background color to whatever you want. I usually leave it black. As I mentioned before, the width and height of the composition usually depends on what your needs are and what the project requires. So I'm going to be, for example, as an example, I'm going to be exporting this video out to Instagram and on the web. And typically those Instagram videos are square, so I'm going to leave that at 1080 by 1080. So we make sure it's a square 1 by 1, correct? And the frame rate, I'm going to put it to 12 because that's the amount of frame rates that I usually work at. It depends on you. You can put it at 24, for example. And that's going to give you a different feeling, a different type of video. Yeah, but right now I'm going to leave it at 12, which looks like as an old traditional hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation. I'm going to click OK. And voila, it's gonna create a black canvas with 1080 width by 1080 height. And it's also created a timeline of 15 seconds, exactly 15 seconds, right? Yeah. And over here, I'm gonna explain the number. So the number after the amount of seconds in the composition are the frames. This is a timeline indicator, by the way. You can use it to get to different points of the video. And when I drag that up by 1 unit, it's gonna count as 1 frame. This is gonna be 1 second over here. Our video is 12 frames per second. So in order to get 1 second worth of frames over here, we're gonna take 12 frames. So you ready? Let's count that together, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and that's 1 second. Yeah, and you can switch between the timing of the composition to the number that only counts the amount of frames. What I did was holding Control or Command and click on that timeline. Yeah, that's probably the only shortcut or the only trick I'm going to show you in this tutorial, because this is a beginner course, so I don't want to rely on shortcuts too much. I'm going to leave that later on. Right, so coming back to this project panel, as you can see, we already had a new composition over here. Everything you're going to put, every assets, every composition that you make during the process of you working on the project is going to be up over here in the project panel, and you can actually create a new folder for a project, and then you can organize it and then put your composition over here. And then maybe you're gonna have one for assets, for example, and you're gonna have one for pre-comps. You know, it depends on how you want to organize. And if you're gonna share your project files with someone else, you're gonna pretty much want to organize it. If you import a new asset, a picture or a piece of video, for example, it's also gonna appear over here in the panel. So for example, I want to import. How are you gonna import something? Well, you're gonna go over here to the taskbar, head over to File, and then get over to Import File. As an example, I'm just gonna import one file. Maybe I want to import this particular picture of my logo, for example. I'm gonna double click on that, and it's gonna load up in the project panel. It's gonna be up here, and you can click on it and drag it onto your composition, either over here or over here. Release, and it's gonna be on your timeline. And also, you're wondering what this bar is. Well, this bar, whatever objects you put onto the composition is going to be reflected here as a bar of sequence of that object. That's going to last for however long you set the composition to. And you can click on it, hold it, and then drag it to another part of the timeline. And as you notice, this bar also indicates when the object appears on the timeline. So as soon as the timeline indicator touches the bar that represents the subject itself is going to appear on the preview screen. If you hover over here to the beginning point of the bar, you get two arrows that go either way from left to right. You can actually pick up the bar and then change the size of the bar. I'm gonna do this to give you a better look right here. So you got one short bar, click on it and drag it to either side. It's gonna either increase or decrease the length of that layer. If you drag it to even longer, it's gonna appear for longer. Depends on the size of the bar of its appearance on the timeline. Speaking of the timeline, not only can you import stuff into the project panel and then drag it over here onto the timeline, you can also create new stuff from out of nowhere into the timeline. So head over here to the taskbar, click on layer, and then select new, and you get a variety of options. You got new text, you can create a new solid, light, camera. These are some advanced 3D stuff that maybe I'm not gonna touch on for this course today. Null object is specifically important if you're dealing with a huge amount of animation stuff. Shape layer is immensely important for any motion designer. As a matter of fact, our video for today is actually 100% comprised of shape layers, so we're going to take a deeper dive later on. Adjustment layer is going to contain an effect, and then it's going to affect other layers as well underneath it. Those are the important stuff that you need to pay your mind on. Maybe not the lighted camera, but definitely these three over here are extremely important. I think in this video I'm going to touch on shape layer, adjustment layer, and definitely going to create a new solid. So let's try that. We're going to try and create a new solid over here, and it's a huge slab of color that we can then input information on, or we can draw mass on, for example. And you can also name your dark square. I'm gonna name it dark square. Basic width, you can adjust it to any size that you want. I'm gonna leave it at the dimensions that we already had for the comp, and you can select the color. I'm gonna choose an easy orange. I hit OK. What I just created is not only a new layer, but also a new folder in the project panel. It's named solids, and the solid that we just created is contained over here in the folder. I realized that I named the solid dark square, but then I just picked a polar opposite color. As you can see over here, as soon as we created that square, the logo that I just had over here disappeared. That's because, as you can see on the timeline, it's also showing which layer is being put on top of which. It's like the hierarchy of appearance. The first layer we got in the lineup is dark square. I'm gonna rename this just square. The first layer that we had, solid. Yeah, the first layer that we had is a solid that we just created, and the second layer is my logo over here. As you can see, you can still see the outline of it. And After Effects decides that whichever layer you have selected, every time you create a new layer, After Effects is gonna create the new layer on top of that. And you can actually take the solid and drag it down below the logo. So now the solid is the second layer in appearance, and the logo is the first layer in appearance. So that's why, as you can see now, the logo is on top of the solid. And the bar of the solid on the timeline also acts in the same way as the bar of the object that we just created. You can actually drag it out and drag it in. And this is gonna apply for every single layer that we're gonna create in After Effects. And next up we got the preview screen. At the bar below everything on the screen, you can actually see a bunch of tools over here. This one shows the percentage of the composition that is actually showing on the preview screen. So if I zoom in, for example, it's actually 200% of the entire project is actually showing. But if you click on it and then you go fit up to 100%, it's gonna show the project in its entirety. This over here displays the preview settings, third and half and full over here in quarter, meaning that the project is being displayed at a third of the amount of pixels that you put in to the composition setting over here. So imagine that this project is being displayed in half of these numbers in the composition settings, or you can put that to auto if you're not sure which settings to choose, and the program is gonna decide that for you. Usually I just go with full because I've got a beefy computer. Now this button over here is like the last button in the way that what it's gonna do is gonna analyze, or it's gonna take into account all the information of the CPU usage, for example, and it's gonna decrease or increase the size of the resolution based on whether your computer can take it. For example, you get a big project and you got a pretty weak computer in comparison, you can go over here to adaptive resolution, and when it previews, right now this scene is pretty light, but it's gonna preview the scene with a range of resolution values to make sure you get the smoothest preview experience. Usually I just leave it off. A lot of people ask me, why is my video pixelating while I'm previewing this video? And the answer lies over here in the fast previews tool, and you can head over here to turn it off. Grid and guide is actually pretty useful over here, as you can engage a grid that is proportional to your composition size, or you can use the title and action safe to, for example, to use a T gauge where the motion should be on. Yeah, so something I wanted to touch on a little bit over here. When you're on the timeline, the way to play through your timeline is to hit space, either space or 0 on your keyboard. Space is gonna do the usual preview of the video, like this. 0 is also play, but it's gonna play everything from the beginning of the timeline. But space, you can actually determine where the starting point of the video is. So you can start over here, for example, and hit space. Yeah, something like that. That leads me to probably the most exciting part about all of this is that you have to take motion graphics at surface level. It's actually just graphics in motion. When you get over here to this layer, and you can see a small little arrow over here, and that's actually the drop down menu of the layer. And when you click on that, you're gonna see another menu, and when you click on that menu, you can see all of the settings over here for anchor points, position, scale, rotation, opacity. And Ben Marriott actually had this really interesting but also kind of accurate point about if you are able to master all of these settings over here, you pretty much can make like almost everything from all of the professional projects that you see. He didn't say it like that word by word. I'm just paraphrasing, but his point is pretty much that if you can control the motion of the graphics, you control the scale of the graphics, you're pretty much doing motion graphics. And I definitely agree. So I'm gonna break down all of these settings over here. So I want to go ahead and break down all of the 4 values first. This is position, pretty self-explanatory. Why is it 540? Why is it 540? Because it is 540 in relative to the number of pixels on the screen. If the composition is 1080, if this layer is in the middle of that width, it's gonna be 1080 divided by 2. That's 450. That's why the position of the layers along the width is 550, which is the dead middle of the composition. If I increase that value up a little bit, it's gonna move towards the right because you're getting close to the end of that width. So if I type in 1080, the middle of the object is gonna end up exactly at the end point of the composition. And the same goes for the height as well. If I move it up to 1080, it's gonna end up in the bottom of the composition. Imagine like this composition is a graph, then the X line is gonna start over here, and the Y line is gonna start over here. And this is gonna be the 0 value point where the X line and the Y line meets. Scale is pretty self-explanatory. This is like the percentage of the original scale that the picture already had. For example, the original scale of the picture 100%, but if you put it to 200%, for example, it's going to be twice the amount of the pixel that the picture of the logo already had. Rotation is pretty simple. It's how many degrees you want to rotate the picture in, and also to which direction. So this is plus 26, which means it's going to rotate to the right. And However, if it's minus 26, it's gonna rotate to the left. Yeah, and I forgot, you can also click on these values and then input numbers that you want on them as well. And finally, opacity is how opaque the picture is. So with 50% opacity, it's gonna look a little bit transparent, and the lesser the amount of opacity is, the more transparent it's gonna look until it reaches 0, which is not, it is not physically there, which defies all the laws of physics. If you bring it back up to 100, there it is. Now the most complicated thing about all these 5 properties over here is probably the anchor point. So the anchor point is actually the point in the middle of each of the layers. It's always, in default, by default, it's gonna end up in the middle. And when you move it, it's gonna be funky because obviously the anchor point is moving to a different point of the layer, but it looks like the layer is actually moving by itself. That is because the anchor point is actually gonna be the determined center of the layer. For example, if the anchor point is down here, the picture looks like it's being moved, but actually the position of the layer is still 540 by 540. It's not according to our eyes that the picture is in the middle. It's according to the anchor point that determines that the picture is actually in the middle of the composition. And the position of the layer over here is just relative to the position of the anchor point. If you want to move the position of the anchor point and move the position of the layer itself, let's welcome the first tool that we're gonna use on this toolbars, and that's the pan behind tool, otherwise known as an anchor point tool. Click on that and you navigate to the anchor point over here on the layer. Click on that and you can actually drag it around to the other position of the layer. For example, if I put it on top over here, you can see that the position of the anchor point has been changed, but so was the position of the layer, and that has been predetermined for you by the computer. And for example, you want to put the anchor point back to the middle of the layer, what you're going to do is head over here, still using the anchor point tool, hold on to that and then press Control. There you go. It's gonna determine for you a point in the middle of the layer, and you release that and it's back to where it was, and so are the values. Once you get used to all the properties of the layers down here, I'm gonna move on to basically the backbone of how After Effects work, are all the keyframes over here. So for example, you want to have the layer move from over here to another position down over here or over here somewhere. You're gonna head over to the position property, click on this small stopwatch over here. Oh, it's actually explaining everything for me. Toggle ability of property to change over time. Oh, yep, there we go. Yeah, click on that and it's kind of create a new keyframe. So this small little guy over here is the keyframe, and everything in the industry, from all the high-end quality works that you have seen online or from other studios, is all carried out around the backs of little guys like this. So yeah, this is one keyframe. And then when you get over to another point of the timeline, for example, over 6 seconds, you notice when you click on the layer, you move it to another point. Oh, what's that? Is creating a line of movement, and not only that, it's also creating a new keyframe indicating that the layer is at this point of the composition, which the position property you can actually see around here reflected onto those keyframes. So now when you play it back between those keyframes, you're gonna see that the layer is moving to that specific point. Hang on, I'm gonna change the frame rate to 24 seconds so you can see better. Yeah, that's actually a lot smoother. What I just did over there was go to composition settings, go composition settings, and then change up the frame rate of the composition from 12 to 24. So now in between 1 second there's going to be 24 frames instead of just 12. So now it looks slightly smoother. Yeah, so that's basically it. The way that After Effects works, that is different from maybe a hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation tool, for example. Is that your object is not permutating between each frame in the composition, is mutating from one phase to another. Each of the keyframes around here indicates one of the phases that the layer has to go through. So for example, I want to add another phase in the scale, for example, that when it goes from this keyframe to this keyframe, it's actually decreasing in size. I'm gonna do that again. Get over here to scale, click on the stopwatch and get over to this keyframe, and then decrease the size to 60%. Now watch how that looks like. Whee! Yeah. And another thing I haven't told you about this scale property is that there is a link, some sort of a chain link icon over here next to the number of the size. And that's indicating that these two properties, the width and the height of the layer, are linked to each other. But if I disable that, now the width and the height of the layer is actually going to move independently from each other. I can drag it up like so, drag the width and then drag the height up independently. Unlike before, when I had the link enabled, when I drag either of these properties up, they're gonna move up accordingly together. Yeah. The thing about keyframes is that you can also drag them to a different point in the timeline. For example, if I highlight both of these keyframes over here and drag them on later to a different point, now watch how that goes. The layer starts off by going to this position first, and then it's gonna scale down later. Let's just add another property. Let's go to rotation and rotate it to 147. Yeah, let's see how that goes. Oh my god. Okay, so that's it. That's pretty much the basis of it. You can close up the drop down menu using this arrow once again, and when you want to call back those, no, I'm not gonna do I already said that I'm not gonna do shortcuts. Those keyframes are always gonna be there in those properties, and whenever you want to see those properties again, and you can enable the drop-down menus, and all the settings are going to be saved on there. Let me just delete those keyframes over here. I think this is an opportunity for me to explain further why the anchor point is the middle of the layer. So for example, when I scale up the layer, as you can see, it's actually scaling. Let me disable the link over here. When I scale up the layer, when I increase the width, it's gonna be increasing from the middle of the layer. But now, for example, if I click on the anchor point tool and then move it to the right eye over here, for example, and then I increase the size, watch what happened. Boom. Yeah, it's gonna increase the size from that eye or from that specific anchor point. The same goes for the height as well. And you know what happens when you rotate the layer with the anchor point standing over here? Yep, it's gonna rotate based on that anchor point. So this is something you can use to maybe animate a propeller, for example, with the anchor point standing in the middle point over here. And you rotate that, so it's gonna look like a propeller of an airplane. Yeah. So now that we've got that cleared out of the way, the last few things that I want to touch on are these two tabs over here. So align, I mentioned before, it does what it's supposed to do in the name, is that it's aligning objects. So for example, you can see my picture over here is sort of offsetted from the center of the screen a little bit. So what I can do is click on that, and over here you can see a bunch of options. You got align left, align horizontally, align right, align to the top, and to the middle vertically, or align to the bottom. I'm gonna demonstrate that a little bit. So right here, picture is offset like this, for example. Yeah, it is in an awkward part of the screen, and we want that to be back here in the middle. What you're gonna do is head over here and click on align to the middle horizontally, and that's gonna do what it does. It's gonna put the image back to the dead center of the horizontal width of the composition. And then one more move we're gonna do is we're gonna align to the middle of the height of the composition, and then now it's back in the middle again. The one thing that you're gonna notice is that this align tab over here, this align panel, it doesn't take into account the position of the anchor point of the layer. It's just gonna assume the position and the border of the layer itself to the alignment. So for example, if you align the layer to the left of the composition, the assumed border of the layer over here is going to touch the border of the composition itself. And same goes with the align right. You know, the anchor point is still over here. So if it does take into account the position of the anchor point, when you align left, the anchor point is supposed to be somewhere over here like this, but it's not, because it doesn't care where the anchor point is. And finally, we'll get over here to all the tool panels of the custom panels that we can see, and potentially it can be very useful for our progress. Effects and presets panel, which can contain all the effects that you're gonna want to add on your layer, so you can add a little bit of spice, for example. And yeah, you know, sometimes it's gonna require it, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, character over here is the property of the text. Ooh, yeah, we can touch on text a little bit. To create a new layer, you're gonna want to head back to the window bar up here, and then click on new text, and then you can type in whatever you want. Course number 1. This is gonna create a new text, but you can actually treat it as another layer in this composition. You know, it's still gonna have all the properties, the usual one: transform, scale up, scale down, and rotations, stuff like that. Like in Photoshop or in Illustrator, there's always a specific tool that you can use to adjust the type within the layer, and that is located over here, and that's the second tool that we're going to touch on today. It is called the horizontal type tool. Boop. And you can now adjust the properties of the letters that you want. You can select the font over here. You can adjust the size of the font, letting and tracking the usual stuff, basically all the stuff you find in a text editor in Photoshop, for example. Oops. This preview panel is gonna come in pretty handy if you want to change up the settings or the properties of how you want to preview your project. These two are enabled by default. So if you want to preview the project without the visual, you can go ahead and click on there. obviously it's not gonna play. Or if you want to play the visual without the audios, you can do that and it's gonna play for you. Yeah, you get the idea. And over here, this one is pretty special. This one is gonna show all the controls and all the path and borders of the layers that you selected inside of the preview screen. So for example, if you enable that, you select the logo. When you preview it, the border of the logo is going to appear in the preview screen, in contrast to before. When you disable that options, it's not going to be on there anymore. The range of the preview over here is determined either by the work area or the entire duration. Now, what I mean by the work area, it is this bar up here, this gray bar that you can see, the bigger one in contrast to this smaller one on here. This one shows the range of the timeline that we can actually see on the display on the interface. If you want to scale it up or scale it down, you hover your cursor over here to the blue thing at the end of the bar. You drag it up and drag it down, and it's gonna shorten or lengthen the amount of stuff you can see on the interface. Same goes with this bar down here. If you want to scale it up and scale it down, you hover around the blue stuff over here at the beginning or the end, and you drag it down. As you can see, this area is no longer bright. The only bright area is the area which this area is highlighted, and that's the work area, and that's what was mentioned by this range of preview over here. So when you play back the animation, it's gonna be only previewing the part that's that stays in the work area. The play from property is that you can choose to whether you want to start from the current point where the time indicator is at, or the start of the range, which is the beginning of the work area. Frame rate of the preview, I like to put it at the same as the composition, but you can actually switch over to whichever frame rate you want to preview it at, not to export it, but to preview it at. And one of the last things that I want to cover over here are the settings on the side of the layers. Up here you get the mode. Mode right here refers to all the blending mode of the color of the layer. So if you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator, you know that the blending mode of the layers over here contains all the usual blending modes provided by Adobe. Screen overlay which is one of my personal favorite. What it does is that it takes the color information of the object, and then it tries to create variations of how the color blend to the information in the background. The masking and the parenting of the layer, I think I'm gonna leave that sometime in the future, because I think they belong to like a more advanced level of After Effects users. I was gonna say, when you try to hover over here and you don't see all the three things, the blending mode and track matte and the parents, usually what you're gonna want to do is go ahead over here. There's a button down here. There's toggle switches and modes. You click on that and it's gonna toggle between all of this settings in place for these switches, which I'm also gonna leave that for later. Since we're in the beginning course, we're not gonna touch on that today. Obviously there were a lot more that went into creating and animating our little Stinky-Doo over here, but so I'm gonna try and cover all of those and explain them as best as I can as we move on later in the process. So yeah, I'll see you all in chapter 2 of this course. I just realized I misspelled courses. So in this chapter, we're going to take a look at how we can use the built-in tools and presets in After Effects to design, and using the knowledge that we learned yesterday on keyframing to animate our little Stinky-Doo. Yeah, so let's jump in. Okay, so the first thing that I always do every time I start a new project is, to pick up the good old pen and paper and draw out the idea that I had. So, because in this course we already got like an idea and a specific example that we want to head toward to, I think we've already cut out or cheated our way around a whole chunk of the process. But one of the most important part of the process, if you're doing a big project, is you're always gonna sit down with everyone, with your co-workers, and you talk through how the sequence is gonna look like, what the storyboard is gonna be like, and what the entire subject of our animation is gonna go through. Okay, so we already got an idea. Let's rough out a little sketch. So our Stinky-Doo is gonna be up here. The screen is gonna be like this. It's gonna be a square. We're gonna have a ground somewhere over here on 1/3 of the entire composition. The ground is gonna be here, and our Stinky-Doo poo-poo is gonna have 3 parts, and this part is gonna have a little swirly stuff. Every time you use an ice cream machine or trying to dispense something soft, you will get stuff like that. Around the top is a little swirl that you get, and then in the next scene, it's gonna drop down from over here somewhere. Draw a little arrow to show the direction, and then as it drops down, something like a cherry is gonna drop. So kind of like putting the whole cherry on top for the animation. And how it's gonna drop down is gonna drop down in the fashion of like this to here, and then it's gonna extend out as soon as it touches the ground. And yeah, I'm gonna walk you guys through of how you can achieve that. You can go ahead over here to the taskbars and create a new composition. I'm gonna name this composition Poopy Scoop. I'm gonna upload this onto the web, so I'm gonna determine that as 1080 by 1080, and it's gonna be semi-traditional type of animation. So I'm gonna leave that as 12 frames per second. Square pixels, that's good, and the duration is 15 seconds. That's all looking pretty good. What I want to show you is a new tool that is very crucial in designing within After Effects, and those are these two ones right here. We got the rectangle tool, but if you click on it and hold it down, you actually get a variety of other tools over here to pick on. So you get rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and a star. Click on that, hold on it, and then whatever you want to choose, just hover over it and then release it. Same goes with the pen tool. Usually I just stick with the pen tool unless I need to add a vertex, delete vertex, convert vertex, or feathering the mask. What I also want to introduce you guys with is what happened when you use either of these tools. So for example, I want to draw out a rectangle. Hover on the screen, click, and then drag out the rectangle, and then as you can see, it's gonna create a new layer called a shape layer. Shape layers are incredibly important, and they've also got their own method of function, method of control, like any other type of layers. So what I mean by that, okay, when I click onto the usual drop-down menu over here, you're gonna see the usual transform properties, including all the basic ones, but also you're gonna notice another drop-down menu called contents. And when you click on that, you drop it down and you see our rectangle shape over here. So what this means is that one singular shape layer can actually contain one or more shape within itself. So for example, if I draw out another shape using the ellipse tool, for example, select this shape layer, draw out, and as you can see, immediately it created another shape within the shape layer that we've already had. If I did that again, but I didn't select the shape layer, it's gonna create another shape layer, because After Effects is not interpreting that I wanted to add another shape into the layer. Now let's return to the drop down menus again. As you can see, next to the rectangle one, you can also see another drop down menu, and when you drop that down, you're gonna see all the components and all the properties inside of that rectangle. You got the path, which are these 4 points over here, which dictates where the shape is and what the shape looks like. You got the stroke, and also you got the fill, which is the color of this entire shape. Now, below it is another transform, which contains even more transform properties. If you click on the drop down menu of the rectangle path, it's gonna be even more control settings for us to mess with. And you got the usual position, right? Shapes, size, and you got roundness over here, which smoothen out all the corners of the shape, and also transform back here for the entire layer. So I'm gonna be pulling some really ghetto stuff over here, but imagine these 3 balls are this setup of balls over here actually represent the transform properties of the shape layer that we just created, of the rectangle that we just created. So you got the inside property of the rectangle. So this is pretty much how the rectangle looks like, or how the rectangle is gonna be. You can move it around, you can scale it up. Imagine you're scaling that up. And you got the outside transform properties that's containing the first shape, but when you move it around, its transform properties is also affecting whatever is going on inside. And then you get the outside transform values, which contain everything inside of it. And whenever you move the balls around, or whenever you scale it up, or whenever you rotate it, everything inside is going to be affected as well. So that's basically the 3 levels of 3, or maybe more if you add more shapes in it. But that's pretty much the 3 levels of transformation that you see in a usual shape layer setup. Now, remember before that I mentioned that this rectangle path is actually these 4 points connected to each other. The reason why you're actually seeing the transform setting of this path is because the After Effects is actually interpreting this specific shape as not being a combination of 4 points clumped together to create a path, but it's actually a singular rectangle, a singular preset rectangle created by After Effects. And you can actually convert this rectangle path to something that's called a Bezier path. And once you've done that, you can see that now it has been converted into 4 singular points in each corner of the shape, and then you can pick up these points and then move it around. And when you click on the drop down menu over here, it's not going to be those same settings anymore, but it's actually going to be a path property with a stopwatch next to it, so you can animate this path. So that was the basic of the shape layer. Personally, it's one of my favorite properties in After Effects. Probably 90% of my career has been based around creating shape layers for at some point in the project, or even most of the project. Now, let's go ahead and set up our scene. We're gonna set up something called a background, and usually a background I'll choose solid for a quick slap of color. This color is alright, we'll take a look at that later. And then we also get our ground, which is also something that is static. So I'll go ahead and click on here. You know what, I'll allow one shortcut, and I'll teach you guys this shortcut, because this shortcut is actually very important in any project, and that is Control D, which is duplicating a layer, duplicating a setting, duplicating an effect. That's one shortcut that I'll allow. So click over here, Control D, and then I'm gonna want to change the color of this slab of color. Let's go up here to layer, solid settings. and then select a different color. So since this is our ground layer, I'm gonna pick something dark, something like this. That's pretty good. That's already looking like doo-doo. Yeah, that looks good. And I'm gonna bring up our proportional grid so I can figure out where is this best to set up our scene. So it looks like here, this part over here is like a third of our vertical axis. So I'm gonna click on this layer, click on the layer of the ground and drag it all the way down to over here. And then our poop is gonna be up here. And then you can make adjustment your own as well. I personally think that if the doo-doo is up here, it's gonna be a little bit too high up. Our whole attention is not gonna be on the doo-doo enough. So you know, I'm gonna drag the ground down a little bit more so that the imaginary doo-doo is actually somewhere in the middle of the screen. And that's gonna be good for audience attention. Now the narrative that follows is that the doo-doo is coming down from here, then fall onto the ground, and then it's gonna expand to a flat shape. It's gonna pile on top of each other. And before we move on, remember to always save your project. So the usual procedure for that is always Control S or File and Save or Save As. Great, now let's go ahead and create our first element of our poopy stink. What we're gonna want to do is select the rounded rectangle tool. Make sure you don't select any of the layer. Hover on top of the composition and draw out a rectangle like that. Now, as you can see now, the anchor point is in the middle of the composition. By default, that's how it's actually gonna be for all shape layers. So how do you get this anchor point to be back in the shape again? It's the usual thing, the usual anchor point tool. Click on here and drag it down and Control. There you go. Now it's in the middle. I'm gonna choose a lighter color so that is easier on the eye. Yeah, like that. We're gonna mess with the color in chapter 3, and you know, as these colors are just here for example, but if your poopy stink actually looks like this, you might wanna get checked up. Yeah, so I'm gonna head over here, going to the drop down menu to rectangle path, drop it down, and you see roundness over here. I'm gonna round that all the way up. I'm just gonna drag it up until it looks good, and now 200 looks like a pretty good value for me. So if you follow the storyline, this piece of poopy is not gonna take this shape in the beginning of the animation. It's gonna be extended out vertically as it's falling down, and then it's gonna take this shape. So how we're gonna do that is we're gonna head over here, uncheck the chain link box, then drag this shape down into a circle. Actually a small tip over here, if you want it to be like a perfect sphere, you can head over here, click on this value, whatever that is, Control C, copy that, and then paste it over here onto this value. Now you have a perfect circle. Let's go ahead to the fun part, which is animating this piece. I'm gonna go ahead and animate the position as if this piece is falling down from above, and we're gonna keyframe the position property for that. Now it doesn't matter which position property you choose to keyframe from either of these panels, because they're gonna affect the position either way. It all depends on how you choose it, and you know, make sure you keep a mental state in mind of which one you've already picked out for it. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit the stopwatch for the position property of this overall transform module, just because I want to see the anchor point moving with the shape itself. And I'm gonna drag that all the way until it disappears from the edge of the screen. And right here, I'm gonna drag it over to maybe 10 frame. That's where it's gonna drop down to the ground when it touches the ground, like so. Yeah, that's good. Let's play it back, see how it looks. This is looking kind of rough, and I want this part over here to ease up a little bit, you know, as if it just it just comes down from something over here, right? Imagine like the anus is up here somewhere. So how do you do that? Is you can highlight these two keyframes, right click on any one of them, click on keyframe assistant, and then ease. Now what that's gonna do is gonna ease up the motion between each of these keyframes. So before this, literally moving from one state, from one phase to another very rigidly, but now once you ease them up, you can actually start to introduce a little bit of flexibility within the motion itself. So as you can see over here, it slows down and then it's only start to pick up speed a little bit in the middle between these two keyframes. When it comes closer to the keyframe at the end over here, it starts to slow down like that. And the important thing is that you can actually control or manipulate how flexible these motions are, and that's by clicking onto the graph editor over here. Once you click on this, you're gonna turn the entire timeline into a timeline of a graph of motion, and right over here you can see the actual curve of the speed being displayed as a curve. And if you don't see this line over here, what you can do is right click on the graph and head over to edit speed graph instead of edit value graph, as I know like some of you might have a problem with, and we're gonna stick with this only for this tutorial. And now as you can see, there's like two handles for each of the keyframes over here. And when you drag the handles out, the line is gonna come up a little bit, and so is the speed of the object. But now when it first starts out, it's gonna start very slowly, and then it's gonna pick up speed over here. And then it's also gonna slow down a little bit right here, like that. I actually don't want the ball to slow down when it's close to the ground, because that's not very realistic. How to get rid of that slowing down motion? Well, over here you can actually click on this handle and then drag it all the way in. So that's, what is being displayed here is that it's gonna reach terminal velocity when it reaches this position, or when it reaches the ground, like that. Now the action is actually taking longer than I expected. So I'm gonna take this keyframe over here and drag it over to the left for about 2 frames so that it ends sooner. Now we're gonna go ahead and deal with the size of the rectangle. So when it drops down over here, I want to make it look like it is extending vertically a little bit just to show a little bit of that speed, or that momentum of the speed being affected onto the piece of poo. And how we're going to do that is actually keyframing the size property within the rectangle itself, and not messing with the scale of the container. When it comes to the scale module, is actually more specific, because this is the scale of the container, and when you change that, it's going to adjust the scale of whatever is going on here. So this container is actually going to interpret this shape as a circle and not a rectangle, based on the state of how it looks right now. So I'm going to demonstrate that. When I extend this out, yeah, look at that, it's still a rectangle, but now it's being interpreted by the container as a circle, as a sphere. So that's just some funky stuff. I didn't say the F word. That's just some funky stuff that I wanted to point out. So yeah, we're gonna head over to the size module within the rectangle, and then adjust that. There we go. It's gonna look like that. Keyframe the state of it now. Make sure the chain is unchecked, and then I'm gonna put that keyframe, this keyframe over here, to somewhere like here. And over here, when it speeds up, when it starts speeds up, I'm gonna extend the vertical axis, or extend the height of the piece of poo. And when I play it back, boop. I still want to retain a little bit of the circle up here, so I'm gonna take this keyframe and move it up a little bit. Actually, up here is nice, and we can do the same with the position property that we just did, which is ease it up using the keyframe assistant, and then make the extension happen a little later in the animation. So what that means is also dragging this out. The reason why it actually got two handles is that it contains the X and Y properties, but right now you only need to deal with whichever handle you can grab on and then extend it out. So now the extension is going to happen a little later, and it's going to look like the action of falling has some impact on the shape of the ball. Now when it reaches the ground, I want it to return back to the shape that it already had. So you can either copy this keyframe over here and then paste it up here, or you can actually just type in the X dimension of this layer like so, and it's going to create a new keyframe over here for you. This one is looking a little bit too long. I'm gonna drag it down a little bit. Yeah, that's good. The motion can be a little bit slower, like so. A lot of what we're doing now is just eyeballing whether the animation looks good or not. So just go ahead and adjust it to how you like. I think that's looking good enough. And at the end over here, at the point of 1 second and 4 frames, we're gonna go ahead and finish off the animation of the poop expanding out over here. Also go over here to the size property and drag the size of the shape out. The piece of poo hit the ground, and because the action of it falling down and hit the ground is so quick, I want to also reflect that a little bit onto the extension of the shape itself, because I want to carry that force onto how it's being extended out. So right here, I'm going to highlight this keyframe, go back into the graph editor, and make sure that the speed of this curve is all the way up here somewhere. So how we're going to do that? We're going to highlight this keyframe and drag it all the way in. So now the speed is actually up here, so the action of the animation is going to happen a lot quicker, and then it's going to ease down over here as if the force is slowly dispersing out to either side of the pool. Now if we play it back, that looks actually a lot sweeter. And right here, it looks like there's a little bit of hesitation in the animation a little bit. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. I'm going to drag this curve in. So we got these two, this Y curve and this X curve is actually almost looks like they're following each other. So that's a pretty good sign. I'm going to put the work area over here so I can loop it back. We actually don't need 15 seconds, Jesus. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Now we got our base of the poopy stink. Keyframes and graph editor. That's the whole basis of animation, motion graphics, motion design. Next thing we're gonna do is create the stacks on top of this shape. We can go over here and collapse this menu. I'm gonna make sure I name it right. I'm gonna call that Schloopy Poop 1. So I'm gonna head over here, Control D. You remember, Control D to duplicate that layer. And now what you can see is that we have another stack of the poop. And one thing that's pretty convenient with all the container setup of the transformation modules is that you can that's another shortcut. You can actually transform all the properties around here of the layer, and the animations and all the keyframes contained in this shape is actually going to be unchanged and unaffected It's just gonna happen at the position where this shape ends up. Is that we're gonna drag the position of this poopy thing down here until it touches the piece below. And you can actually micro transform this shape using the arrow keys. So you know, move up, down, right, left until it's just about touching the shape below. That's pretty good, yeah. And you know, it looks like a second stack. The second stack is going to be smaller a little bit, and it's gonna fall down as soon as the other one finish extending out, and not falling at the same time, because it's not gonna look very good. So what I'm gonna do is at the end over here of this sequence, remember we have a keyframe for this thing to extend out. We're gonna highlight that keyframe and then change down the size of the width. So now it's gonna end up something which is about 200 pixels smaller than what we had down here. And now when we play it back, there we go. It's gonna look like another stack on top of the poop. How do I make this thing over here happens later than this shape below it? One thing you can do is highlight all the keyframes over here and drag it out this way. That's gonna be too messy in the timeline, and I would not recommend that at all. The optimal thing would be to take the entire layer over here and drag it out and offset it by a few frames. Maybe 4 frames is okay. Let's try 4 frames. Ooh, that's already looking good. Drag it up to 5 frames to see that this whole thing has already almost finished extending out before that thing touches it. Boom, boom, boom. And we got another one up here. And so you know the drill, right? There's going to be another one up here. We're going to repeat the process all over again. The Sloopy Poop 2, Control D on that, and we're gonna get a third copy, and we can repeat the process again. Drop down, transform first, position, you can drag it up over here to about just touches the second piece. And now we can head over to the contents, bring up all the keyframe. Make sure you move the timeline over here. Even if you highlight this keyframe and you extend it out, it's gonna create a new keyframe whenever your time indicator is at, and it's not gonna change this value at all. And it's gonna look pretty wacky. So I'm gonna roll it back, you know, delete this keyframe, set the time indicator to where this keyframe is, and then you can drag it down even more to about 370. That's a good number. Then you can offset it by another 5 frames, which is 10 frames over here. There we go. Now we got a stack of 3 poops. If you remember back in the sketch, we also have a little bit of swirly part up here, which also appear in the in my initial example animation. And how we're going to do that is that, you remember, one shape layer can actually contain multiple shapes at once, and also those multiple shapes can be animated independently from each other. The reason why I don't want to create a new shape layer and then draw a different shape on top of it, it's all have to do with the layer styles that I'm gonna cover in chapter 3. But basically I want this shape and the swirly thing that we're gonna create to have the same color properties, the same layer styles. So now we're gonna start by selecting the third layer, go over here to the pen tool, and then we're gonna draw out the swirly part. If you're familiar with Illustrator, this is gonna be easy for you to get a handle on. And basically you just draw out 3 points that follow each other, like so. And maybe, for example, you don't want this part over here to curve around. You can actually take this handle, hold Alt on your keyboard, and it's gonna turn your cursor into something like this, and you can drag it out. And and it's gonna independently control that curve. Same goes with this. You gotta take that. It's not gonna affect the entire Bezier curve that like it just did over there, but it's gonna affect only this curve. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. Now we got a swirly part on the top to top it all up. As I mentioned before, each of the components and each of the shapes inside of the shape layer can be animated independently. When this rectangle falls down, this is still gonna stay the same unless we animate them. So I'm gonna introduce you guys to a new concept, which is path animation. Now this is probably the closest thing to frame by frame animation that I can think of. A lot of professional designers and animators use path animation as if they were frame by frame, because you can get extremely ambitious with path animation. I'm gonna animate this so that it's keep on staying on top on the third piece of poo as it comes in. So this is the state of the path that I want to keep the piece of poo on, and that's why I'm gonna put a keyframe on that. Then I'm gonna scroll back some frames a little bit. I'm gonna use the pen tool, but when you use the pen tool, you're gonna notice that all of these points are already filled up, and you cannot actually adjust them. Yeah, what you're gonna have to do is click on the shape itself, and you can actually now move it around. So I'm gonna move this point so that it covers the ball. And this point over here is not gonna be as extruded and stands out as it's gonna be at the end of the sequence. So I'm gonna put it like this, as if it's just some small details. As it extends out, it's gonna extend out with the shape. So let's just watch it back again, like so. Yeah, I really liked it. When the shape is still at the top, as soon as the shape comes into the screen over here, I'm gonna drag the entire thing by selecting these 3 keyframes and dragging it on top like so. And now we got a keyframe over here, and as you can see, between these keyframes, After Effects is gonna automatically find the fastest way from this path animation to go to this path animation, and then goes from this one to this one, like so. And I don't think I've dragged it up enough for it to be on top, so I'm gonna drag it up a little bit more and see how it goes in this frame. Still not enough. That's a little bit better. Drag it even more. That's good. Okay, I think this is the part where we can introduce a little bit of frame by frame animation. When it falls down like this, the same concept that applied to this shape over here also apply to this shape, which is that it extends out as it falls down to introduce a little bit of momentum, and that's where I think we can get a little bit of frame by frame to comes in. So I'm gonna take this pointy end of the path, I'm gonna drag it out, and this one gonna curve a little bit like so. When we get over here, we still get a little bit of that momentum going, still got a little bit of that extension going out. We've already got a keyframe over here to see what it's gonna be like, so it wouldn't hurt if we change the shape of it a little bit, like so. Now let's watch it back again. It's gonna be in here. It's gonna slowly move to the right and not actually start out from it because of the force. And then what you're gonna want to do is highlight all of them. Same thing. Go to keyframe assistant and then easy ease. I want this swirly thing to finish the transformation in the same amount of time as this rectangle finish extending out. So how I'm going to do that is go back over here and remember, drag out this so that the transformation speeds up over here and slows down gradually the further we get to the end of the animation, like like so. I'm gonna drag this in a little bit more. Yeah, so now the swirl looks like it's not only following the momentum of the poop, it's also being pressed down by the force and extends out along with the poop. Very nice. And now to top it off with a literal cherry on top, we're gonna draw out a cherry for our own. I'm gonna create a new shape layer over here, or you can just grab the pen tool and then draw out a shape. My workflow, usually I just go over here to create a new shape layer and call it cherry, and color it something else, maybe fuchsia. And then I'm gonna draw out cherry for our own. Head over here to the ellipse tool, then draw out a single circle, very simple one. And then I'm gonna color it with something a little bit more like a cherry. Go to the ellipse path. If you remember how to turn this from the properties size and position to a singular path, you remember how to do that is go over here and right click onto the path itself and then select convert to Bezier path. All we need to do now is select the pen tool, head over here and drag this point on top, drag it down, and then I'm gonna select these two handles for the sides. I'm gonna drag them up a little bit. These two handles, I'm gonna drag it inwards. Yeah, and yeah. That looks almost like a heart shape would do. That looks like it would work as a cherry. And then for the stem, I'm gonna also draw it out manually. So select the pen tool over here, click on the cherry, and then I'm gonna draw out the stem starting from the fruit. Not a long stem, just a simple one would do. Like so. Boom. And finish it off by connecting these two end point and starting point over here. And I'm gonna color it with something that I'm gonna color it green. And as you can see over here, the newly created shape is actually being put on top of the old one, and you can actually put the stem behind the old shape over here like you can with the layers on the outside. Click on that shape and then drag it down below the ellipse, and voila, now you got a complete cherry. Boom. And now what I'm gonna do is rotate that and scale it down a little bit and put it on top over here. So I'm gonna eyeball them to make sure I get the falling position right. So it's gonna start up over here somewhere, and then it's gonna drop down in here into this pile of Stinky-Doo, and then it's gonna slowly sink down into brownness. And also I want to arrange that cherry behind the poop as well, so that it looks like it's sinking in like that, and so we can start to get to animation. I want the cherry to start dropping over here somewhere at the 2 second mark. One thing you can do to organize the project as you go is you can drag it the cherry over here per instance of appearance, so that is more recognizable if you jump back into the project again, or someone else gonna take a look at your own project and they're gonna be able to recognize what sort of elements are on the screen. So now I'm gonna choose the position module, keyframe that wherever the cherry is, then drag this keyframe out to a few frames, 4 frames. And then this one, I'm gonna drag the cherry up all the way to the top. Now let's play it back. Boop. Boop. Maybe a little bit faster. Yeah, I like that. Right click that, keyframe assistance, and easy ease. Now go to graph editor and then I'm gonna pull this one all the way out, and then this one all the way in to make sure there's no easing when the sherry hit the poop. That's a little bit too quick. I'm gonna drag it over here, out here for example. I'm gonna slow it down a little bit more, maybe by half. Yeah, make sure you tweak it until it looks right for you. And now I'm gonna animate the later part where the sherry is sinking into the pile of brownness. I'm gonna skip over here to like 2 frames, keyframe that by clicking onto this add keyframe button over here. But with this time, there's no like transformation in between them. I'm gonna drag to maybe the end over here to about 3 seconds and 8 frames. And I'm gonna drag the Y position down until it's deep inside the poo. Let's watch that again. And also I'm gonna jump into the graph editor, highlight this keyframe, and then I'm gonna drag the handle. I don't want the sherry to start sinking down as soon as it relaxes inside within this piece of poop. I want it to slowly, gradually sink down instead of sink down immediately. So I'm gonna drag this handle out a little bit. Okay, the final thing that we want to do is for this piece of impact over here, we want to change up the how this third piece look and make the movement seems more believable. Right now it looks a little bit robotic. It looks like the cherry just something solid, you know, and it's not. There's not a lot of reactions to that. I'm gonna change the path animation of this world and the size of this third piece so that it looks like it's stretching out and stretching back in again. We're gonna head down to the rectangle shape once again, extend that, and over here we got the size of the rectangle itself. I'm gonna move the time indicator to when before the sherry drops down, finishes dropping down, and I'm gonna keyframe over here onto the size. Then moving 1 frame forward, I'm gonna extend this out a little bit, and as I'm extending that out, I'm also gonna drop down the height of the piece of poop for a little bit of reaction. And then moving forward a few frames, I'm gonna bring it back to normal, which is this keyframe right here. We can just highlight that keyframe and then Control C and then Control V, paste that onto this place. Just for a second there. Yeah, so a little bit of bounce like that. Maybe I want to make this happen a little bit slower. And this one also. Drag these out. And let's go ahead and jump into the graph editor a little bit. There seems like to be a little bit of easing when the poop starts to extending compared to when the sherry touches it. So to fix that, I'm gonna select this keyframe over here and drag these handles all the way all the way to the left, so that the easing sort of happens almost instantaneously. Maybe just drag this keyframe out a little further. Like so. Create a little mound like that. Yeah. So the state of it now is looking like this keyframe. The setting before the keyframe when the sherry drops down exactly 1 frame before. And also this little swirl is gonna have to move somehow. And I'm also gonna jump into that, extend the menu of the shape, then keyframe that, go over here to when everything starts to move, and then just go ham with the transformation. I think maybe I collapse the swirl down a little bit, you know, like so. The force of the cherry has forced some part of the swirl to fall out a little bit, like that, and like so, and I also want this sharp edge over here, this sharp corner of this row to disappear. I'm gonna also change the Bezier curve as well, like that. Drop it down here. There we go. And move this keyframe up a little bit. Right, now for a little bit of overshoot, I'm gonna drag this keyframe, the ending keyframe of this row, over here, and then Control C or Command C, copy that, and paste it over here. Oops, sorry. And then paste it over here at this point, because I want it to push down a little bit before it comes back to its final resting position. So change up the options a little bit, make it more extreme, you know, change up the curve. When it transforms to its final position, make sure it's not speeding up too much, like so. Now play it back. And it can have a little bit of offset to the motion. Beforehand, the final resting keyframe, the final resting phase was at here, in the same place with the extension of the poop below. But you know, you can drag it over here to one frame for it to get more variety within the motion. Yeah, like that. And now we can collapse all of these drop down menu and let's watch our animation back again. So when you're done with this chapter, you should end up with something that looks like this, with all the finished animation. Everything's still looking flat, but that's what we're gonna cover in chapter 3, which is exactly the title of this course, which is polishing this TURD and everything that's included inside the animation. Let me know if you got any question with the animation down below. I'm gonna try to help you guys out with that. And once you're ready, head over to the final chapter.
They've been rejuvenating, refurbishing, polish a turd, it's still a turd.
Well, welcome to the final chapter of the mini course, or a long tutorial video. I don't know what to call it anymore. And in this final chapter, we'll be taking a look at how to add a secondary animation into the video. And we'll also be taking a look at bringing more life into the animation using gradient colors and layer styles. And usually in all of my projects, this is the part where I spend most of my time on, and it's a pretty exciting part, and I hope you're gonna like it. So let's jump in. Right, so to carry on from the last chapter, we've already had a pretty good basic animation of the poop, and what I'm gonna do over here is actually add another keyframe that drags down the sherry a little bit, so that it's got a little bit of bounce when it hits the soft surface of the poop. Yeah, like that, just a small little adjustment. This is a part where I think pretty much draws the difference between beginner basic looking animation compared to an advanced, more intermediate level of animation and presentation. This is also the part where it makes a difference between a poop or some vanilla ice cream. Depends on how you want to customize it, but for now we're just gonna make it to look like a poop. Alright, first thing first, let's get ourselves familiar with the coloring of the shape layer. So over here you got two options to color the fill and color the stroke. Stroke over here refers to the outlines outside of the shape. So you know, if you put the stroke to be blue and drag the stroke size up to however pixels you want, you can now see that is dragging out the outlines. But now we're not gonna bother with the stroke just yet. Head over here to the fill. Now the fill, we've already went through the fill once in the previous chapter. But another option that you can see over here with the fill is that when you click onto the name, the title of the option, you can see that there's many options for how you want to color the fill. So for example, you get none, which is no color at all, solid color, which we already had, and here we get gradient, linear gradient, and a radial gradient. So these two are the ones that we're gonna be focusing on. Here, click on OK to apply the linear fill. Now, as you can see on the gradient fill, we got 2 points that's gonna dictate where the array of color of the shape is gonna be. So you get the start point of the shape, which refers to this point, and you got the end point, which refers to the ladder. And also, if you click on the gradient fill, we also have the two handle over here to control the starting and end point of the color. So so now imagine, if you will, that there's a light source from the right side of the screen coming in. So how we're gonna adjust our gradient is that we're gonna put the light side onto the right to reflect that there's a light source over there, and then drag the darker side over here a little bit vertically underneath the lighter side a little bit, something like that. Yeah, that's good. And then we're gonna go into the color themselves and change it up on the white color over here. I'm gonna click on that and then change it up to something a little bit more poopy like. Maybe a lighter side of the orange. Orange is just a lighter brown, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. And then also on the darker side, I'm gonna choose a brown color, darkish orange one. And then I'm gonna drag down the hue a little bit. Don't be afraid to get a little bit more red or a little bit more yellow into it too. Something like that is good. I think that's good. And also you can also drag the color stop up, and the closer these two are together, the lesser there will be a difference of color or a transition of color in between them. And also you can also drag up the midpoint to control that transition between colors. Now I'm gonna just leave it over here, maybe drag it closer to the lighter side a little bit like this. So yeah. I'm also gonna want to drag this down just a little bit, just to get more of that lighter side. Yeah, that's pretty good. Right, so now we got a pretty good base for what we're about to do next. I'm gonna head over here, right click on our layer, and head over to layer styles. As you can see, you got a bunch of options to stylize the look of your layer with. And if you're familiar with Photoshop, this is pretty much gonna look like the blending options you got in Photoshop. Yeah, so now I'm gonna start off with inner glow. I always start off with trying to get a bit of rim-like look to my object. I'm gonna drag the size up a little bit, get the choke up so that the shadow is not looking too soft on the edges over here. And I'm going to change the blending mode. Always play around with the blending mode to see which one fits you. Usually we go with overlay or color dodge, and that's probably my two most favorite based on usage. I'm going to go ahead and click on overlay, and as you can see, yeah, you got a pretty good looking sort of rim light effect over here. I always leave the technique as softer. You can also change the color of your inner glow. I'm gonna head over here and change it to something more orange and more in tone with what we have. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. It's doing a pretty good job of helping to accentuate the highlight coming from the light source over here. And now I'm gonna go to the opposite side, and I'm gonna add in layer style and add in a inner shadow. Alright, so now you got a pretty soft drop down of a shadow based on the outline of our shape. And now you can change the angle of the shadow. I want it to be down here somewhere, so we'll change that up to 240. Drag up the distance of the shadow, and also drag up the size a little bit. You can leave the shadow usually at like a total black color, but we can change that up a little bit and introduce a little bit of brownness and redness into the shadow for the sake of variety, and drag up the opacity a little bit. I like it when there's more inconspicuous color in the styling of everything. Blend mode, I'm gonna head over to overlay so that we get more of that redness. Next up in the mix is the bevel and emboss to actually improve and accentuate on the highlight and shadow a little bit more. Bevel and emboss, it actually adds another layer of shadow and highlights. So I'm gonna drag the angle out here so that it aligns with the ones that we've made underneath, and drag up the size. Right here you can see I don't want this sort of solid block of color. I want it to be a little bit softer, and you can do that by softening the bevel. Yeah, and the fun thing about bevel and emboss is that you can actually control this layer of shadow and highlight individually. So highlight color, I like to pick a color that's again close to what we had, or could introduce a little bit of warmth to it. Set the highlight to maybe color dodge. Ooh, look at that. It's almost like the light is blending down to the level of highlight above it, below it, sorry. I kind of like this. I kind of like this bit of orange over here that's extruding out from where it's supposed to be, thanks to the color dodge. I'm gonna try overlay to see how it looks. Yeah, let's stick with color dodge and give it a lighter side. And I'm gonna decrease the size of the bevel and emboss a little bit for this layer of shadow. I'm thinking, we can do the same thing, a little bit darker, so then it blends with the layer of shadow below it. Right now, still too bright. As you can see, now we have it's like a little bit of reflection from the light that protrude onto the ground. No idea why I just said. Yeah, it's like a little bit of light reflection from the ground. Something nice to improve on the details of the shadows a little bit. That's looking nice. Let's play that back to see how it looks. Yeah. And what else are we gonna add? I think finally we can add a little bit of introduce a little bit of gradient overlay on top of everything. Since if you want to introduce a new range of color, or you want to introduce a new sort of temperature to the color, you can head over here and edit the gradient a little bit. Get a little bit of orange in. Maybe a darker orange, and the shadow part is gonna have a little bit of redness in it, or green. Yeah, let's try a little bit of green, turquoise green. See how that looks. In the blending mode, you're gonna add that, change that to overlay. As you can see, it's still keeping a little bit of green over there, but it's already lost a lot of the details that we had underneath. So I'm gonna drop down the opacity a little bit, or try a new blending mode. Yeah, I think over our soft light. Yeah, I think I kind of like the look of soft light right now, and you can see a little bit of green blending in with some brown over there. That's very natural looking. This is like the gradient that we've already had in the fill for the shape, only you don't have the control for the start point and end point. It's not as versatile as the gradient inside the shape itself. and you can actually copy and paste the settings that you had for this layer onto the rest of the layer itself. So let's do that. Let's start with the gradient fill within the shape. Gonna head over here to the rectangle, click on this gradient fill and copy that, Control C. I'm gonna head over here to the second one and I'm gonna paste that, and make sure you delete the fill layer that it had originally, which is this pink color over here. Delete it or hide it away, and now you get the same gradient setups that you already had for this layer. And so yeah, you can do the same thing with the rest of the shape. Go over here, copy the gradient fill from this one, head over here to the third layer, and then do the same thing again. Copy that gradient fill into the rectangle, delete the fill. Same thing with the shape, delete the fill. And now what we have set up over here are three shapes that got the same gradient fill setup. Actually, I don't want this shape to be protruding from the looks like it's protruding from the gradient itself. So what we can do around here is drag the shape down to below the rectangle and then adjust the gradient fill of the shape itself. So you get this little tone over here that's more aligned with this one. Let's see how it goes. Let me play it back. Nice. And yeah, do the same thing with the layer style. Drop down menu over here, just click on the layer style, copy the entire thing, and it will automatically carry all the settings and all the style that already it had to the other three layers. I actually had a previous segment where I walked you guys through adding CC plastic onto these layers to get some more reflection details, but for some reason CC plastic just in this case doesn't seem to work well with blending modes. Because it's just keep on glitching up and down, so I don't want to make you guys having to suffer through all of those mental gymnastics. So I think we're gonna keep all the settings that we have in here and then move on to the sherry on top. And we're gonna head over here and change the setting from a solid to a radial gradient. And then we're gonna drag it down here so the shadow look like it's at the bottom. That's looking good. And then edit the color again so that you got that sherry, semi pinkish, magenta color, something like that. That's good enough. And we're gonna also do the same with the stem. Gonna put it into linear gradient, and then a softer greenish color with a darker tone, like so. Nice. Something like that, yeah. And now, as you guessed it, we're gonna also add in some layer style to it. Usually, I'm gonna do it from scratch again, but you can, if you like these settings over here, you can actually copy them as well, and we'll change it up from over there. It looks like it's already applying pretty nice to the cherry. We're just gonna change up some of the settings, like the color of the shadow or the color of the glow. Get over here to the pinkish, more warmer tone. Inner glow, I'm gonna change that to a cherry sort of glow, or we can put in a little bit of blue, I think, yeah, blue, and it just sort of make the red pop even more and get a semi-cool look to it. Bevel and emboss, I think that's good how it is. Just change up the highlights a little bit. We can actually make the highlights a little bit pink, and then over here gonna make the shadows much more blue, because I like when the sort of warm contrast with the coolness within one object. I think that's pretty good look. Nice. Next up is we're gonna deal a little bit with the background. Now, since the background is a solid block of color, there's no pre-built-in gradient system just yet, so we need to add that on using either layer styles, or we can use one of the effects that have been provided to us, which is 4-color gradient. There's a hyphen between, yeah, there we go. 4-color gradient, and then we click on that and drag it onto the background. As you can see over here, these 4 colors are gonna be assigned respectively to these 4 points over here. So when you move the color, when you move the point, the color is gonna move with it as well. And we can get pretty crazy with all the combination of colors that we can get for this part. I'm gonna set the bright color over here to indicate that that's gonna be where the source of the light is coming from. I'm gonna put this over here. That's gonna be a little bit more ambient light to the background, and this is gonna support it. And then this right here, this is special color. This is gonna be the darker one. That's gonna be the shadow provided by the presence of the Stinky. And yeah, I'm gonna put this over here, and I'm gonna adjust each of these colors accordingly to our use. And this one is gonna be the light source. I'm gonna make it brighter and yellowish more, something like that. Gonna make it warm. These two are ambient colors, and they can be like you know, a semi-tone that supports the background and supports the scene, and they can be any shade of yellow and orange. I kind of want to make it a little bit brighter over here, and this one I'm gonna drag out a little bit more, and this one's gonna be way deeper over here somewhere. It's gonna be a dark brown, even darker. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, still pretty much the light source is coming from here. You get the point. And more yellowish. There we go. That's that's pretty much. We can also apply the same treatment that we had for the ground, and you know, you can make sure you can do some adjustment to it a little bit more. Take your time with it, this creative process. I'm gonna drop it down a little bit more, like it's a stage, and the stage is presenting this huge pile of poop. Now, yeah, it's all down to the business of putting some glow onto the poop to make it stand out a little bit, and then add some shadows over here from the poop to the ground. So I'm gonna go ahead and highlight all of these layers over here, and head over here to layer, pre-compose, and hit OK. Now what that does is that all of these layers that we've just selected, pre-composing is gonna put that into a separate composition, and it's gonna create a new composition here as well, as you can see, and we can actually name it to anything that we want. Usually there is a glow effect over here for After Effects, and you know, now you can actually disregard all the glows that I had in here because they're all plugins. We're gonna just focus on the stock glow that After Effects already provided to you. So it's actually this one, and you can take it and drag it to the layer. And now up here you got a bunch of settings that you can use to adjust your glow with. You got threshold, which is like the minimum and maximum level of where your glow can affect. A glow radius is how wide your glow is gonna be, and glow intensity is how bright it is, like that. Usually if you just apply it onto the effect over here, I don't think it's gonna look very good. So what I usually do if I have to work with the base glow effect is that I'm gonna duplicate this layer. So the layer on top is going to be the one without the glow, and the layer at the bottom is gonna be the one with the glow. So right now I'm gonna add the glow back in again and then see how it looks. Last time we did it, we kind of actually lost a little bit of highlights, or the original highlights we got over here, because everything is so overblown by this effect. But now we actually have a separate layer that's on top. We actually still retain some of that details. And now it's all down to the business of adjusting the glow. Yeah. And now, with the glow as a separate layer, we can actually change the blending mode of how the glow is going to look. So for example, if I want to get rid of the glow, the dark glow over here, because it's obviously is a dark and shadowy part, it should not be glowing at all. And I'm gonna try and get rid of that by changing the blending mode to something like color dodge, or maybe classic color dodge, or maybe linear dodge. Linear dodge actually retains some of the colors and some of the details from the glow. I think that's looking pretty nice. And now for the shadow, I think we're gonna go ahead and carry on the same process. We got the original layer of poop over here without any effect. I'm gonna duplicate that, and for this layer I'm gonna put a hue and saturation effect under the color correction panel. Click on it and then drag it to our layer. And now I'm gonna drag the saturation all the way down, and so is the lightness, so that we got a huge blob of black poo. Then we're gonna extend it out. We're gonna blur it up a little bit using the we can use a fast blur or a Gaussian blur. And it being a shadow, I think we can be pretty much flexible with the choice of blur that we have, and we can blur it up over here. And then you're gonna see some details that is being reflected here onto the ground. We only want that sort of detail to show up, right? We don't want this entire thing, blob of shadow, to show up. How are we gonna do that? Is that we're gonna make the ground a mask for the poop. So I'm gonna duplicate another layer of the ground, and I'm gonna move that duplicate up on top of the shadowy stinky bloop. And then for this shadow to be juxtaposed onto this ground, we're gonna head over here to track matte, and then I'm gonna put an alpha matte of the shadow onto the ground and see what happens. Yeah, boom. Now we got only the part which the shadow touches the ground is gonna be visible on the ground. As you can see, the layer of the ground has disappeared and is now turned into a mask for the shadow to lie on. Then you can drag it down so that the shadow also covers the both end over here on the ground itself. I'm gonna drag the opacity down a little bit. Yeah, 85 is good. Let's play that back again. It's so funny, I'm sitting here showing you guys how to do a poop animation. Okay, and I'm gonna turn back the glow on to see the combination of those three, how they're looking. Maybe the glow is a little bit too much right now. What I'm gonna do is drag the glow opacity down over here. You can drag it down to 64. Yeah, that's looking good. I do mention that I'm gonna walk you guys all through also creating secondary motion animation as well. So if you look up online, you can see that the definition for secondary animation is the animation created as a reaction to the primary movement. And you know, they also mention how it's like other elements in the scene that are tied to the narrative and tied to the main subject of the scene. I personally like to think secondary animation is all of the elements that are not tied to carrying the narrative forward and are there to be a spectacle, to be some sort of eye candy. And you know, the more secondary animation you put into your video, the more like you're gonna get on Instagram. I'm just kidding. So you remember in my first video when the sherry hits the piece of poo on the top, some pieces of poo comes flying out, and we're gonna go ahead and design and animate those pieces of poo. Now I'm gonna head over here to layer, new, and create a new shape layer, pen tool, right? And I'm gonna draw out something that looks like there are debris or something like that, you know, with a general direction of heading to the right side of the screen, something like that. And I'm gonna click on that and add another little shape for the sake of details. And I'm gonna click on the layer right here, and I'm gonna change the gradient fill to something that is more similar. You can adjust the fill a little bit. I'm gonna drag this over here so we get some of that bright color, and this one as well. Yeah, there we go. Nice. And then the final step is obviously copying the layer style from that pre-compose of the stinky poop, and then add it over here to the shape. Brilliant. Now we got two debris that we can use when the sherry comes in and create an impact with the poop. So I'm gonna decrease the length of the shape layer a little bit, open up the transform modules, and I'm gonna keyframe the position property and also the rotation property. Yeah, so good. Now I want that to start out over here. It's gonna be pushed up a little bit, like so. Yeah, that's good. And a couple frames forward, I want it to already be flying out of the screen and perch downwards like that, as if it's flying out and then also falling down as well. Yeah, let's play that back to see how it looks. Nice. I kind of want to speed that up a little bit. And also, as you can see here, you also got like two handles on the curve line where the object is traveling, and the curve line can also be adjusted by grabbing those two handles and then curve it up a little bit like this. So now the piece of debris is going to follow a curve. I kind of want to size it down a little bit, just so it's not too distracting. Oh, it's disgusting. Oh my god. And also the secondary animation element that I'm gonna add in is a little bit of glistening happening on the surface of the sherry. So let's do that again. Layer, new, shape layer, and this time I'm gonna hold the rectangle tool, click and hold it, and go to the star tool. I'm gonna put my cursor over here and then drag out a shape. I'm gonna want it to change the sort of color back to a fill, and I want it to be all just white. Drag it up. And the fun thing about Polystar is that you can actually change how many corner of the star you want it to have, or how many points, sorry. And this star, you can drag it up all the way to however you want. For this video, we're gonna do 4, and we're gonna drag this in a radius of the shape in. Maybe play around with the outer radius so that it got a sleeker look. Yeah, that's pretty good enough. And now it's all down to the business of animating this. First, make sure you put the anchor point in the middle of the star. Drag the length of the shape layer back over here, and then I'm gonna pull up the transform properties, drag the scale down to 0, and then keyframe the scale property and the rotation property. And for the next 3-4 frames, it's gonna come up here, be glistening a little bit to 100%. And it's also going to rotate while it does that, and just leave it at the pretty a little bit diagonal like this, and then it's gonna disappear. For the disappearance, I want it to happen a little bit later, once everything has finished animating. So I'm gonna highlight this keyframe over here, drag it all the way close to the end, like so. So now when we watch it back, it's a little bit too quick. I'm gonna drag these down a little bit more, and that's too much rotation. I just want it to be slanted a little bit, like so. It's kind of disappearing way too quickly for my taste. Gonna drag that up. It looks like one of those PowerPoint animation. So you're gonna highlight them all and right click to one of them, keyframe assistant, and of course you're gonna easy use it. I'm gonna highlight these two scale and rotation properties, head over here to the graph editor, and I'm gonna want to ease the ending up so that it happens a little bit quicker than it is now, and then it eases into its final position, like so. Maybe a little bit more rotation. And then I'm gonna drag down the opacity as well. So I'm gonna move it about here, so that when it disappears, still stays on top of the subject. Let's try and see that again. Yeah, that's nice. Cool. So this is where the glistening stuff is gonna end. And I'm gonna drag that, drag the shape layer down to over here. Also, I'm gonna put some glow onto the glistening to make it stands out a little bit more. Stylized glow. And since you're not gonna have any problem with the color underneath, I think this glow works fine for the effect itself. Drag up the radius and intensity a little bit. Yeah, look at what we got. Awesome. And for the final touch, I'm gonna click on the glistening so that we create a new level on top of that. Head over here to layer, new, adjustment layer. Now what the adjustment layer is gonna do is gonna apply all the effects that it had on top of all the layers below it. This is gonna put all the finishing touches, and all the color correction is gonna go in here to an adjustment layer. So now what I wanted to do with this is add in a little bit of grain. I'm gonna type in grain, and it's good to use the original grain that After Effects had, and it creates a little box of preview over here so that we can see what's gonna happen with the grain itself. And I don't want this box to stay, so I'm gonna go over here to the viewing mode and click on final output, and we can see all the grain has been put onto our final animation. I'm gonna bring down the intensity of the grain a little bit so that they're not too distracting, and I'm gonna bring the size down as well. Boom, now we have something that looks a little bit like a deep fried image. We don't want it to be too soft because that's gonna look pretty odd. You can also change the color of the grain as well from monochromatic, which is black and white, or uncheck it, and then you get a variety of grain from red, green, and blue. And I'm gonna drag down the intensity a little bit more, like so, so it's not sticking out while you're looking at it. Awesome. Whew. Awesome. I think that pretty much wraps up the mini course tutorial animation for today, whichever you want to call it. Not just yet. I actually forgot how to show you guys how to export your video out as a file. So you're gonna go over here to composition, click on add to render queue or add to Adobe Media Encoder queue if you do have that program. Usually I just go to add to render queue, change up all the settings here to your preferences. Usually I just leave it the best quality possible and then go to the QuickTime format because that's the industry standard sort of. hit OK, save it onto anywhere you want, and then just hit render. And there you go. So now we've reached the end of the mini course, and I just want to say thank you guys so much for following me through all those process. It's been unreal making this video, and as promised, I've put a link to the project file down below, also with a little bit of a completion package for you for getting through the course with me. And the password for that is gonna be, did you just skip through? Are you seriously skipping through the end of the video for the password? Come on, okay. No, okay, seriously. The password for the project file is poopity scoop. And yeah, all you need to do is put that into the zip file, and you're gonna have the project file to yourself, so you can check it out a little bit further. If you guys have any questions regarding the tutorial or regarding the video itself, make sure to leave it in the comments down below. And also, let me know what you think about the entire experience. If you enjoyed it, if you like it, and yeah, the whole thing has been surreal. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.